We'll take some questions from the audience in a minute, but I want to start maybe by asking you, what was it about the trawl fishing that interested you as a subject for a film? Start there, maybe start somewhere.
I'm not sure. And there are lots of banal or contingent reasons why. I don't know if there's anything profound. Yeah, I mean, I collaborated on this film with my friend Leviathan, and we both finished up earlier films. We were living in Boston with small kids. We were fed up with destroying our families by traveling to the back of beyond, and never being present and wanting to do something local. And we both have backgrounds, personal biographical backgrounds that relate to the sea in more or less oblique ways. So I grew up in Liverpool in a shipping family. My father was working in the docks, in the port in Liverpool. And she grew up in Gascony in the southwest of France with a father who was an amateur diver, scuba diver basically, fishing. So she would spend countless hours and days swimming with him, fishing with him, waiting on the boat, wondering whether or not he would reappear. And our earlier works were all more or less within the realm of non-fiction, and we were interested in doing something that had some personal implication on our part, but not making a first-person kind of confessional diaristic film, but making a film about something that we both felt implicated in. And the sea, or humanity's relationship to the sea, was a theme that interested us both. And there's this town, port town, near Boston in the United States, where we've been living more than half the year. I'm in the Lake District most of the rest of the year. That is still actually the largest fishing port in the United States in terms of the dollar value of the catch, in terms of actually how much fish comes in. But which has now fallen on really hard times, but which was an incredibly important port. It was the whaling capital of the world. It was economically hugely important until the end of whaling in the mid-19th century. It was the port of departure for Moby Dick, for Melville's novel. And it's collapsed. I mean, textile mills kept it going basically after whaling until about the 1970s. So it's a town that now, it's less than an hour southeast of Boston. It's a town that now has the highest, one of the highest rates of criminality, of unemployment, of drug addiction, of different kinds of dereliction in the United States. So we're interested in the tension between its current circumstances and its mythic historical past. And initially the idea was actually to make a film about fishing in which one would never go to sea, in which one would never see any kind of fishing undertaken. So for a few months we were filming on land in New Bedford, all of these industries that related to fishing. Pieces of rubber, tires, second-hand tires that couldn't be exported to the third world, to explode on trucks until they're occupied after a couple of weeks. They had 32 lathes and they were recycling these tires into different kinds of what are called cookies, different kinds of products that are used in the fishing industry. We were filming ice manufacturing and everything, lots of different industries that are about fishing but you'd never see fishing. And that was all quite engrossing and quite challenging as an idea of a film. The idea of a film is the narrative structure would be to make a film about fishing with all of these strands, with all of these braids would only come together at the end, but the subject, the ostensible subject, would remain invisible. But then we accepted the invitation to start. We were going out around harbour and so on different boats with stevedores, lumpers as they call them there, and filling up with oil and offloading and everything. But then when we started going out to Georges or to the Grand Banks in the middle of the Atlantic, once we were out at sea, everything that we'd experienced on land fell by the wayside. It just seemed banal or mundane or too familiar. So in a sense we had this, it wasn't quite an alibi, but we had this sort of biographical interest through our childhoods in doing something about fishing or doing something about the sea. And we started concentrating on this place, and when we went out to sea we were utterly obsessed with trying to render in a new way, trying perhaps overly ambitiously to do justice in a new way to what industrial fishing is about. Just the violence of it, the both aesthetic and almost cosmological kind of magnitude of what's involved. And you know, humanity's relationship with the sea is very, very old. It's basically a form of hunting and gathering, but now it's this sort of post-industrial coda to this really long history since the Paleolithic. Anyway, we ended up making a film in which you never see land, in which you barely see daylight. You're just in the middle of the night, in the thick of night, in the middle of nowhere. You have no you have no horizons, in which you're lost, you're at sea, in the sea, and that became the film, I guess.
You used the word violence just now, and one of the things that's quite obviously unusual and stunning about this film is how much this violence that you show is really divorced from human agency, immediate human agency. I mean, much of the violent spectacle that we're subjected to in the film doesn't involve people at all. Really, it just involves something that people have done by putting this boat out there, but in which they are as much the passive witnesses or observers of it as the agents of it. So could you comment on the place of the human, maybe, in this film? And when you say that you're making a film about fishing, let's say it's about fishing, what you're showing about fishing is more than just what people do.
It's really hard to concentrate when it's sort of zen-like fountain sound effects coming in.
Yeah,
it doesn't put me in a very zen state of mind.
Sorry.
The place of the human in all this violence. I don't know.
Or maybe this goes to...
No, it's a super good question. It's just preposterous to suppose that the filmmaker, just the spectators have got answer this question. The film, like, gives something out there, and the idea that the filmmaker knows what the film is about.
No, I know, but that's true. But you could say something about your what base concepts that you're working with, because somebody could go out and make a documentary about the lives of fishermen, and it would be...
We can say anything we want to, and you don't have to give me the answer. I'll try. Let me just try. We knew there was a track, right? We knew there was stakes here. If we were going to look at 10 trillion films about fishing, fishing is probably the endeavor or the form of labor that has been the most over-photographed and over-filmed since the invention of photography in the mid-19th century and cinema at the beginning of this or the end of the last, or whatever, not even 21st, sorry. But from Octavius Hill and then from Robert Flirty and John Grierson on, fishing loomed large. And typically it's been romanticized in one way or another. There are these noble fishermen going out, risking life and limb. It's gendered, and macho guys, you know, fighting the elements, coming back. And man of Aaron, right? You have this woman on land, looking out, like looking come back alive, etc., etc. And so we knew if we were going to inflict on the world some like umpteenth film about fishing, it had to be something different. So we didn't try to watch all of these films and look at all these photographs and read all the literature about fishing, but it was a sort of baseline that we were trying to, not repress, but to distinguish this film from. And it was precisely about the place of the human in the cosmos, or in the larger world. And also within cinema, as well as within the cinema of fishing, which is that cinema is basically the human is the privileged subject of cinema, as it is of theatre, as it is of the novel, as it is of art in general, but not exclusively. And our effort, our attempt here is to kind of relativize the place of the human, to put humanity back into nature, but a nature that's not romanticized, that's not sentimentalized, and in the machinic and industrial and the post-industrial all coexist. But it was to kind of give the human a much more humble position in this larger sphere. We may have destroyed nature, or there may be no such thing as nature left. It might all be post-nature. But in the end, humanity is a minute little, it's not an irrelevance. It's, yeah, to try to relativize and to try to make more humble the realm of the human. Within filming, that was obvious. It wasn't even thought. It was just like we were so at the limits of our own capabilities, of representation, of experience. We were just, we were out in the Atlantic. It was black. It was dark. I was peeking out the whole time. It was kind of obvious. It was a fait accompli. In terms of editing, we did have this debate about what to do with the human. Whether to start off in the realm of the familiar, the obvious, the fisherman, and then end up in the realm of Leviathan, or nature, or the sublime, or the diabolical, or all of the above, or vice versa, to start off in the realm of something really radically unfamiliar, and then to gradually domesticate the human, or to introduce the human. And in a sense, we did quite do neither. Like the first 20 minutes, which are not discombobulated, but which are very figural and abstract. There's no, I don't think anyone on a first viewing would discern a cut at the time that it happens before we get to the fish, the close-up of the fish sloshing back and forth on the deck. And those first 20 minutes are embodied and disembodied. They seem to be shot from the point of view of a fisherman, but it's super abstract and figural, and then suddenly you're underwater, you're over behind the stern of the boat. And then gradually after that, the fishermen very slowly, elliptically, obliquely enter into the frame and into the narrative. Like a cigarette, like 2 cigarettes, plus one to the other fishermen, so on. There's a sense of sociality, there's a sense of this labor that's learned by rote, that's super efficient and super destructive. And then that culminates perhaps in a not so familiar shot of one person who happens to be the captain falling asleep in a still shot that lasts an infernal amount of time, that lasts 6 minutes, right? He's looking at the screen that we don't see, it's shot from the screen, or shot from right below the screen, kind of a surveillance camera, and it happens to be, and that's not, the sound is synced there, it happens to be The Deadliest Catch, this Discovery Channel reality TV show about Alaska crab fishing, and he's trying to stay awake, he's halfway into it, but he's so exhausted, and in the end he couldn't give a shit. It's just this sort of terrestrial, artificial, fictitious concoction that we all feed off. We terrestrial folk all feed off. And then he just collapses, or he falls asleep in a state of exhaustion, which is something that happens very rarely in art and even in cinema. You see people, sleep is stereotyped, but the act of falling to sleep, they're much more amorphous and liminal. The fluid process of falling to sleep doesn't really get much attention. And everyone said we should end there. Finally, you've ended on the human, you arrive at the human, you should end there. But we didn't really want to end on the human in that way, which is why in the end we go back and you'll see back to this. It's more acoustically than like visually overwhelming at the end. We go back underwater and you have the chains and you have the nets and you have these different fragments of crustaceans and fish passing by, and in a sense it's Leviathan perhaps exacting its revenge, or as much as we are Leviathan, we're also giving ourselves into Leviathan. So to start off in a realm of something that's ambiguous and incomprehensible, to gradually bring the human into the frame, and then to decimate the human, or to allow us all to interrogate ourselves in the face of what we're doing to the marine resources around the world today.
Were there certain kinds of shots that you knew in advance, as you set out to make the film, that you did not want to have in the film, and that therefore you did not plan for? You don't like that one either?
No. Like we didn't want the Maggie Duran shot, the Man of Iron shot, of the fisherman's wife looking at the sea, wiping her brow, wondering whether he would return alive. We didn't want a noble fisherman trope or anything like that. But we didn't know what we were doing, honestly. We had this bet. Neither of us had ever been seasick before in our lives. We had this bet as to which of us would become seasick, and both of us being more macho than the other was convinced that neither would become seasick. And I puked my guts out the whole time, and reckoned I was impervious to all this. We both knew that we didn't want to do another film like Fisherman, but when we were filming ourselves, our images were not that different, to be honest. And when we started looking at our own footage, we were like, how does this differ from The Deadliest Catch? How does this differ from reality TV? It may not be the same narrative construction, but the actual images are just as amazing, just as overwhelming, just as climactic, just as much a spectacle in a sense. So we can make a film that's about this relationship between fact and fiction, or between construction and what's happening, and maybe Deadliest Catch isn't so bad after all. But our cameras were consumed by the sea, one after another. I mean, the waves, we got splashed by waves, so it doesn't take much of a wave to knock out the electronics of a contemporary high-def video camera. So we had no cameras left. And we had all that footage that we shot with our own cameras ourselves, and we could have used it. There's only one shot from our own cameras that we used, except all the scalloping stuff is shot by us. And there's some other stuff that's handheld, but most of the stuff, over 50% of the movie is shot on these tiny cameras that we attach to the fishermen's bodies, or attached to different... We handheld ourselves, but they didn't have to be here. We didn't even have half the time we didn't have a screen. So all the stuff of the underwater or the seagulls, we were filming with our bodies. We were imagining, we were feeling what was there. We weren't in any literal way seeing it. When we started seeing the footage that was shot from the fishermen's heads, or their chests, or their hands, we were completely transported. We were bowled over by that, and all our footage went out the window at that point. The only shot in the film that we shot with our regular cameras that we kept was a shot, I don't know if you can remember it, basically coming close towards the end in the scalloping sequence. It was a dark shot of the captain reflected through a window at the controls, with various people running around on deck below at night. And these kind of Lilliputian creatures running back and forth. Everything else was shot with these minute little extreme sports cameras that we didn't control in the same way.
Are there questions from the audience for Lucien?
Yes. Do you actually go in the water with the camera? Or is that, did I not understand wrong? Like what is filmed on the water? You mentioned your body, but you were not in the water.
No, we didn't. Neither of us fell overboard, neither of us dove into the water. If you're out on deck and it's a tall raft, you don't really know whether you're underwater or overwater. There's no real difference. So you know, are covered in slickers and different kinds of oilskins or rubbers, and the camera itself has to be encased in some kind of plastic impermeable membrane. But we put these cameras that were waterproofed on sticks that we could hold underwater. So in the act of holding them underwater on maybe a stick that was, or two sticks attached to each other that collectively were 15, 16 feet long, sometimes half of your body would be underwater, depending on where the boat was and what the waves were like. But we didn't deliberately jump into the sea. So the cameras were underwater. But I'm just saying, because they were 15 feet from the person from either me or Rekana holding the stick, we were imagining what was being caught. We weren't actually watching for a viewfinder of what was being.
And the same with like the fish tanks also.
The fish tanks after the red fish net arrives and hits the camera and all the red fish come out. Yeah.
Also sort of hang. But it felt like very physical. I was anyway very much struck by the presence of the camera and the role it takes in the film. In a way, like taking all the roles, being human, being water, being fish, being sky, being very beautiful.
Is there a question in the back there? Yes, go ahead.
How did the sound recording work? Do you record sound on the cameras, and how much chroma would you say was designed?
I have no idea. I don't know what the word design means.
You had it designed.
Design, de-sign, take something that was a sign and not being a sign. I don't know. Yeah, no, I mean, I understand the question, I just haven't got an answer. So all the sound was recorded on the boat or from the boat, in the water or the sky. These cameras, these extreme sports cameras that we were working with, as well as DSLRs and remote cameras, they have a mono microphone in them that's crappy. Anyway, and then we had to put them inside a plastic housing to make them waterproof, so it's even more compromised by that. They would record sound, and it was, really compromised, attenuated, stultified kind of sound that felt like it was suffocating, but which had a really reduced frequency spectrum that we really liked. And rather than getting rid of that and adding in fake naturalistic sound in order to give it some kind of cinematic naturalism, we decided to really include all those sounds. And as these cameras, all these microphones on the cameras were going in and out of the water, they gave off, or they emitted, or they created, or they recorded these sounds that we'd never heard before, which we tried to reproduce in the final sound mix. It sounded at once as if they were non-human, they were machinic, they were electronic, they were always digital artifacts, and at the same time it sounded as if they were drowning, they were gasping for air. And we actually brought out a lot of the resonances and the frequencies of these digital artifacts and these small microphones on these cameras. Then we also had our own sound that we recorded with much better microphones, stereo microphones, 2 cameras, and it was actually just a really good sound recorder, which was wild sound that we laid over, but some of which was literally synced and recorded at the same time, some of which was similar processes. And both of us are tone deaf, so we were just editing this thing blind or deaf. And it was unremitting, it was grunge, hardcore, heavy metal, punk rock kind of soundtrack. But then we gave it to our colleague, who's a super, super sensitive sound artist and musician, Ernst Carroll, and he came up with a 5.1 surround sound. It was much more modulated, much more delicate and subtle and variegated, and much less ostensibly cinematic. But it was very beautiful, and we worked on that for a few weeks with him, layering different sounds. And then we worked with sound designer in New York City, Jacob Ribikoff, who added a lot more of our wild sound and made it more accentuated the surround and made it much more ostensibly cinematic. So it's like I don't know, like the final mix is like a combination of the final sound design and Jacob's maximalist Hollywoodian tendencies, really kind of Cajun, minimalist inclinations, and our tone deaf of living.
Good questions.
I have this is a question, which was the way, I had a principal question, the way the cameras were placed, to me felt like you were getting a perspective from the seabird, say, or the fish, or, so whenever there was a new section of film, for example, the shots of the fish, I actually felt numb, and I wondered whether you were trying to get kind of the perspective from that particular, the fish or the fisherman or the seabird or whatever, or whether it was an overall experience that you were kind of trying to grasp. Because it felt like the placement of the cameras was very specific, in order to get a kind of overall dimension of what fishing is from. Do you understand what I'm getting at?
Yeah, I can answer. never wanted, in terms of an overall perspective, we were never trying to give like a BBC,
No.
like synoptic, contextual, explanatory overview that would tell you everything about the dire straits of fishing in this day and age or anything like that. In terms of the tension between the singularity of different perspectives and then this more general overview or view from above or the cooptation of different perspectives. That was never felt as a tension for us, but it is for others. So some people seem to think that this is a film of just this multiplicity of perspectives, which doesn't cohere into a single unified point of view, and that either the virtue or the vice of the film is that it fragments the authorial perspective into this multiplicity of different types of perspectives. So you get the elements represented, you get the boat, the machinery, the post-industrial, you get the fish, etc., you get the human, the ministry. We work in a really instinctive kind of embodied kind of way. We discussed that, but in a really theoretical way. But I guess I would say that I think this tension between the totalizing or the overview and individuality of these different perspectives is not a total opposition, and that we all have forms of consciousness and unconsciousness that oscillate between the really particular and the really universal. So I think there are multiple different perspectives here, optical, corporeal, etc. But I don't know, I think it depends on the spectator as to whether they end up coalescing into a unitary experience that you take away with you, or if you're... I mean, to be sure, we didn't want the typical human... there was something post-human about this. We didn't want just to privilege the human in all the romantic, sentimental kind of way that we know human typically portrayed in cinema, especially in transportation. But it wasn't as if we were trying to subvert that by just saying, this is a film there. I mean, there's no presumption that we would see the human from the point of view of the fish. That would be completely absurd. Or to ascribe agency to the boat and say this is what the boat perceives or experiences or whatever. But it was supposed to be disconcerting, I think, in the sense that it's supposed to allow one to question the role of the human. As much as we've decimated the world, and we continue to decimate the world, but it's too late when it comes to fishing, to realise that how, in the Bertrand Russell, you talk about waste spaces, the sort of infinitesimal insignificance of human waste spaces, these larger spaces in nature. And that was definitely for all of the mechanical, especially acoustical overload, sensory overload of being on that boat, just the feeling that as much as you were violating the bottom of the ocean, you're feeling simultaneously of being infinitesimally insignificant. You know, you could drown tomorrow, the boat could overturn tomorrow, or in an hour, nobody would notice, and you were just like this monumental speck of insignificance for a moment on top of the ocean. And we've got an answer.
There's about 1 million hands in the air, but we have no time, unfortunately. However, Lucien, if you are willing, perhaps you would like to talk outside the cinema with some of the people who have their hands up. It's the beginning of a discussion that I hope continues. Let's say good evening then, the rest of us, to Lucien Castaing-Taylor.